everyone. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the first presentation in the 2012-2013 Library Faculty Association Seminar Series. So Ann and I, as coordinators of the series, are absolutely delighted to have you here for our own award-winning faculty who are joining us today. Natalia Fernández in the middle, Tiah Edmunson-Morton here, and Larry Landis just received the Outreach and Engagement Vice Provost Award for Excellence Diversity Award by Vice Provost Scott Reed. So we commend them for that and for their work on the Oregon Tribal Archive Institute, which led to recognition in this way. And of course, is the subject of today's presentation. So, for speaker introductions, prior to joining OSU in November 2010, Natalia Fernández interned at the National Archives and Records Administration's Chicago Regional Office, as well as the Arizona Historical Society. She also worked as a graduate assistant at the University of Arizona Library Special Collections, and she holds an MA in Information Resources and Library Science from the University of Arizona as part of their Knowledge Builders program, and also has a BA in Art History and Spanish Literature. Tiah Edmunson-Morton has worked at OSU for 6 years. In addition to her instruction and reference duties, she coordinates SCARC's social media outreach, works on assessment projects, is interested in mobile technologies, and is also the library's history and philosophy instruction librarian. She has served as president of the Northwest Archivists Association, is the editor of the Northwest Archivist publication Easy Access, and has worked with the Northwest Digital Archives Usability Groups. And she holds her MLIS from San Jose State University. And Larry Landis has been at OSU since 1991, serving first as Assistant University Archivist, and is now Head of Special Collections and Archive Research Center at Oregon State University Libraries. Among his many activities as a longtime professional archivist, Larry has served on OSU's Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Activity and worked to repatriate many items from the Horner Collection to Oregon's tribes and other tribal communities throughout the United States. He's also a member of the State Historical Records Advisory Board, and Larry holds a master's degree in history from Texas Christian University and took archives-related courses at UT Austin's Graduate School of Library and Information Science. So please join me in welcoming Natalia, Tiah, and Larry as they present Moving from Institute to Network, Reflections on the Oregon Tribal Archives Institute. Thank you. I forgot to mention they will also have time for questions at the end, so and apparently significant time for that. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Anna. So my name is Natalia, and I think what we're going to do is start off with just me explaining what our roles were within the project and sort of give you an overview of what we're going to talk about today. So Tiah and Larry and I make up 3/4 of the Tribal Archives Institute for planning, committee, curriculum committee, and everything else in between. Our other member, Laura Cray, was a graduate assistant with us. She was intern in summer 2011 and summer 2012, and she is a graduate student in history of science at OSU. So she couldn't make it today, but she was definitely that extra person that we couldn't have done this without her. So we are going to start off with Larry talking about the project background and the site visits that we did with all the tribes in the summer 2011. And then Tiah is going to talk about the curriculum planning portion of the project. And then I'm going to finish up with the Institute planning, the Institute itself, assessment, and then some of the plans that we have for the future. And we might be jumping into each other's sections a little bit as need be, but pretty much that's how it's going to go. So with that, I'll leave it to Larry.
Thank you, Natalia. So let's see if this clicker works. Helps if I press the right button, right? I think, well, it's appropriate to start out with just explaining what the heck is the Oregon Tribal Archives Institute. It was a project designed to assist Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes by providing them with in-depth and affordable, that's really one of the keys, archives and records management training specific to tribal communities' needs. was essential in establishing a formal and sustainable archives and records management program for tribes, which had been difficult in the past, in part due to lack of affordable and location-accessible training. There have been a variety of training opportunities that tribal communities have been able to participate in, but there have been many barriers. In 2003, the Western Archives Institute, which is sponsored by the State Archives of California, developed a tribal archives institute of their own for tribal archivists and records managers. The Western Archives Institute, though, tends to be rather costly, rather spiffy. Fortunately, we've been able to send 2 of our staff members over the years to it, but there is a significant cost associated with that. In terms of the Oregon's tribes, the location is not particularly accessible. The tribal-specific Western Archives Institute in 2003 was either in California or Utah. I don't remember where, but several hundred miles away from most of the tribal communities in Oregon. It's a 2-week time commitment. That is huge. Any of us being gone for 2 weeks know that. As a result, for that 2003 Western Archives Institute, I think there was 1 attendee from an Oregon tribe. In 2009, Oregon was fortunate to host the Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums Conference in Portland. Tiah and I participated in that. It was an excellent conference, excellent sessions, but the sessions didn't provide a whole lot of granularity, and it wasn't designed to be an overall training institute. The sessions dealt with specific topics, but it didn't flow as a training institute. And the cost was a barrier as well. There were a number of attendees from Oregon tribes, but it still cost it cost money to attend that. Buddha mentioned that one of my activities is being a member of the State Historical Records Advisory Board. And over the past 3 or 4 years, the SHRAB, as we call it, has done a number of archives and records management workshops, but they tend to be 1 day. They are free, but they're 1 day, and they don't address specific tribal archives issues. So despite these training opportunities, they haven't been a good fit for Oregon's tribes. Over the past 10 years or so, the Special Collections and Archives Research Center, and particularly the University Archives side of it, has had a long history of working with Oregon's tribes, most of the tribal communities. This really can date back to 2002, when the University Archives partnered with the Anthropology Department in developing a 6-week-long field school to assist the Klamath tribes with some of their cultural materials. This project was led by Deanna Kingston, who unfortunately passed away earlier this year, but she was really the main effort behind it. The University Archives' role was to develop and teach a 1.5-day workshop for members of the Klamath tribe. Carl McCreary and I did teach that workshop. But again, it was a day and a half. The next year, 2003, we did a partial day workshop also for a number of Oregon's tribes, but again, it was just a very brief overview. The University Archives has done a lot of work with the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Reservation, about 45 miles west of here, close to the Oregon coast. I worked with an OSU intern in 2005 who was assisting the Siletz tribe with work on some of their historic photographs, organizing them, doing some basic cataloging work and some basic preservation work. And in 2010, we also advised the Siletz tribal community on a National Historical Publications and Records Commission grant that they were applying for to develop finding aids for their collections. Tiah specifically did a thorough review of that proposal and provided them with some input. That grant actually was successful. The Siletz tribe has had some difficulty in implementing it, though they have gotten an extension. And I'm actually very happy to announce that Aaron Clark, who is a recent Emporia State Library Program graduate and who has been a student assistant for both SCART and CDSS over the past 2 years, will be the contract project director for Siletz, and we'll be working to create those finding aids over the next 9 months. So one of our own, sort of, will be participating in that. I think that's great. One of the main impetuses behind the Tribal Archives Institute was the 2009 Memorandum of Understanding that OSU signed with the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. Many of those events were held here in the Valley Library, as some of you may recall. One of the key pieces from that MOU called for the OSU libraries to assist Warm Springs with its records management program. And we took that very seriously. Kind of along with all of these other activities, I've had a number of ongoing conversations with David Lewis, who is the former Cultural Resources Manager for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. And we had numerous conversations on the need for archival training within Oregon's tribal communities. So all of these things together kind of coalesced, and we decided that rather than developing training specifically for Warm Springs, why not extend it to all of Oregon's tribal communities? So complying with our obligations to the MOU, but expanding it to Oregon's, all 9 of Oregon's federally recognized tribes. So Faye and I had a number of conversations about this, and in late 2009, we decided to develop a training institute of our own. We would seek grant funding to support it. And this also built upon a previous project that I had been involved in called Envisioning Oregon, which was a project to really foster collaboration among all of Oregon's archival communities. And one of the specific recommendations in that report was to connect with Oregon's tribal repositories. We identified LSTA funding as the most likely source. LSTA stands for the Library Services and Technology Act. This is money that comes from the Institute for Museum and Library Services that is given to each of the state libraries in the states in the United States. It's essentially a re-grant program. They turn around and re-grant the money to libraries throughout the state. We identified LSTA as a likely source given the nature of the project. We developed our brief proposal in the spring of 2010, submitted it, and in June we were notified that we were invited to submit a full proposal. Our pre-proposal was the 3rd highest rated of all of the new proposals. I took that as a very strong endorsement. So we began developing the full proposal in the summer of 2010. We envisioned it as a 2-year project because of the nature of LSTA funding. We had to divide it up, partially because LSTA funds multi-year projects, but you have to submit a proposal for each year's piece of the project. We garnered letters of support from the tribes. We got a letter of support from Oregon's Legislative Commission on Indian Services, other letters of support from key players such as the Society of American Archivists, Native American Archives Roundtable. So we had a broad base of support in terms of the letters to go along with our proposal. So we submitted that, and in the fall of 2010, we were notified that our year 1 proposal would be funded. The contract called for a February 2011 project start date, although it actually didn't start until May because the pass-through money from IMLS did not get to Oregon until that time. So that put us a little bit behind, but it was something that we were able accommodate nonetheless. The year one project had a total budget of just over $20,000, split pretty much evenly between LSTA funds and local in-kind library funds, mostly staff time. The goals for the year one project included a needs assessment survey that we sent to all of the tribes. But the real heart of it were the 1 to 2 day site visits to each of the 9 tribal communities, which included tours of facilities, discussions, so on and so forth. And I'll talk about the site visits here in a second. The other goal for year one was to begin developing the curriculum based upon the information that we garnered from all of the site visits, and to begin determining the specific date of the actual institute. The year two proposal, same proposal development schedule, pre-proposal in the spring. We were fortunately invited to do a full proposal for year two, and that was done over the course of the summer. Submission in mid-August and then notification in October. The year two project actually began on time, February 1st. It actually overlapped with the last piece of the year one proposal, year one project, which caused a little bit of confusion for our accountants over across the street, but we managed to work that out. The year two proposal had a $36,000 budget, $19,000 of LSTA money, and $17,000 of local in-kind. Most of the LSTA funds were for subsidizing the attendees, the tribal members to attend the Institute. We wanted to eliminate the cost barrier completely, and the geography barrier by subsidizing their travel as well. The year two goals were to finalize the curriculum, complete the remaining logistical planning, such as the where they were going to stay, meals, that kind of thing, develop the field trips, and all the other pieces that are involved in a week-long event such as this. Obviously, the main year two goal was the Institute itself, and then the follow-up assessment. So kind of switching back to the year one proposal, as I mentioned, the heart of the year one proposal were the actual site visits. And in planning for the site visits, we left the agendas intentionally open. We had an outline of what we wanted to accomplish, but we didn't make it extremely granular because we wanted to be able to let the tribes really set the agenda in terms of what they wanted to talk about. But we did explain what the Institute was all about, what our goals were going to be, and we allotted the remainder of the time for the site visits to conduct a needs assessment, which included tours of the facilities and information that the staff was able to share with us. Also included discussions of current challenges, future plans for the development of both their administrative records as well as cultural archives. We were addressing not only the governmental archives of the tribal communities, but the cultural archives that most of the tribal communities have as well. And we typically found that after we explained our goals, the tribal members were very willing to share with us. We had gained their trust, which was really, really important. I think if we hadn't done the site visits, we would not have gained their trust. And we would not have had a successful training institute. Each of the site visits averaged about 4 or 5 hours, depending on the development of their current programs and the amount of material to be covered. Actually, a couple of the site visits were day long, and 1 or 2 actually extended into a second day as well. I think the shortest ones were 3 to 4 hours. Following the site visits, we developed a brief report summarizing the current programs, areas for future development, and institute logistics specific to each tribe. And then we shared those back with the tribes, particularly the folks who had attended the meetings. So in all, we made 8 trips to do 9 site visits. the Coquille tribe and the Coos-Isle and Lower Umpqua were done on the same trip, since they are both in Coos Bay. But we made 8 trips, and I estimated that we logged about 2,600 miles in doing those trips. Mostly in the motor pool's fleet of Ford Fusions, which were actually good cars. But as I mentioned, the site visits were very, very essential to the success of the Tribal Archives Institute. And I think that was, that year one piece of it really did set the stage for what came after that, which is my transition to Tiah and curriculum development.
Hello, everyone. So as you can imagine, pulling all of that information from the site visits together into an actual curriculum was at times a very challenging thing. And we sort of outlined objectives of what we knew we needed to do to make this happen. So kind of apart from where people would stay, the logistics of the actual institute, we had to identify topics. We had to figure out how those topics made sense, kind of in logical order. We had to figure out who we wanted to teach those sessions, because we're not experts in everything. And we had to figure out how to collaborate with people who were not all within our time zone, let alone our library. So I think there were lots of pieces that we had to put together on the curriculum end. So this was our list of topics that we came up with. We read through all of the site visit reports and literally just wrote down everything that anybody said that they wanted to learn about. And then we pulled it together into this really big list of topics, which was really a challenge for me because I hadn't been on the site visit. So what I was going by were these reports. And of course, Larry and Laura and Natalia were there for me to ask. But I think when you're thinking about developing curriculum, reading rankings that somebody provided in August, for instance, to plan something for the next August was pretty challenging if you weren't there to talk about it with them. We also needed to be realistic, and I think a week seems like a really long time if you think of 40 hours of teaching someone, for instance, but it really isn't. And we needed to also plan for how much people can absorb, because a week of somebody pouring information into your head, I mean, we all know this, there's a point where we stop listening. So I think planning for covering these topics, but also planning for different ways that we could present these topics. And we also needed to make sure that the majority of the topics were interesting to the majority of the attendees. So it's not just enough to say that 5 people said they wanted to learn about grant funding if 7 people didn't rank that highly. Obviously it did, since it's at the top of our list. We also needed to know who would teach it and what they needed to know sort of in preparation. But we, again, needed to be general enough in this curriculum planning, because when we really got into the meat of it, it was still 9 months out. So you didn't want to make things so specific to projects, for instance, examples of projects that were going on, but those projects were already done, and the final line had been written, and there was nothing really more to say. So how do we do this? We did it by drawing. And I actually brought this example because this is what we did. We struggled around with trying to write our own curriculum at a time, and then we realized that this was the best way to actually identify. So what we would do is day by day we had pages, and we color-coded each of the things on these pages in the order that we wanted them to go in. But then when we unfolded this today, we were like, well, what did red mean or what did green mean? So it was color coding that was really helpful at the time, and now it's an archival document that nobody knows what it means. So we organized all the topics that you saw before into a cohesive schedule. We had all of these pieces of paper with lots of arrows. And then the sort of fun part, but also the challenging part, was to identify the people that we wanted to teach. I think what's really important in thinking about the curriculum development for this institute is that again, we're not the experts, and it was really important to have people teaching these sessions that had either a personal connection to the issues, specialized knowledge, but we kind of, for our own sanity, needed to be able to hand over curriculum development. Here's a topic, you're the expert, develop your curriculum, let us know what to put in the binder. I think that was really our approach, was that we couldn't design everything and we couldn't teach everything, or we would all go completely crazy. So we identified trainers from each of the little icons that you see. Jennifer Emile, who was at the time at the National Museum of the American Indian, she's now the university archivist for the U of O. She was kind of in transition during this institute, so we're really lucky to have her now in the Northwest. Kira Homo, Karen Eslin, Nathan Georgitis were the trainers for the U of O, and they did a lot on what we call Digital Day. So they had a day and a little bit to talk about all things digital. And also from the Oregon Folk Life Network, Emily Afanador and Ricky Saltzman came to talk and then have dinner later with the attendees on one of the days. I think it was the end of Digital Day. But what was, and then of course there's us, we had staff from Benton County host one of our field trips, and Natalia will talk more about that. And during that field trip day, Trevor and Elizabeth were gracious enough to staff tables. So we had lots of different people involved. But I think in addition to all of the trainers I've mentioned, two really important people who were involved in the curriculum were David Lewis and Robert Kenta. And they're both tribal members. So I think having them teaching sessions, Jennifer Lewis is also a tribal member of Grand Ronde. And I think having them teaching sessions was really important in this way, because we can identify all of these topics, and we can say that these are general enough that they would meet records managers and culture keepers and archivists' needs, but tribal archives and libraries and museums are not university archives, libraries, and museums. So I think having these experts come in and talk to us really specifically, talk to the attendees really specifically about what they knew and share and open up that conversation was really important, I think, in the success and how people felt about the Institute. So every week we met, and sometimes it was just to update each other. Sometimes it was to make sheets like this. So it really was a very long-term project, and I think that was probably a good call. At the time, it felt like a lot to have weekly meetings for something that was happening 9 months later, but it kept us really engaged and kept us moving along. We did everything, all the planning for the Institute on the wiki, which is great because now we have this big body of knowledge that we can share with people. And it was also a way to invite those other collaborators and trainers to come in and really directly contribute to the curriculum. And now we have this great record of what we did, and we love that because we're archivists, so we love to have records. And the TAI wiki is not quite as cryptic as my notes on this big piece of paper, so it's the record that you can actually use. And I think that's the transition to Natalia and the actual institute.
So the Institute planning. If anyone here has ever planned a conference, Essentially, the Institute was part of that process. You have to plan for the lodging and for the meals, and arrange for transportation, and for field trips, plan all the special events, put together the program, the binder, all of those elements were all the things that Laura and I were the two that really worked on it, and then Tiah and Larry really helped us out. So that was mostly in the summer, this past summer of 2012, was when we really started to actually plan everything. In terms of the lodging, that was actually here on campus. The purpose of it was to be able to host the attendees here on campus so that they would be within walking distance of the Valley Library. We actually hosted a lot of the sessions in these two very rooms. And they stayed at Hustle Hall, so there was about a 10-minute walk or so. And they had the opportunity to have meals in the dining hall. They could go elsewhere if they wanted to, and a lot of them in the evenings would sometimes go down to Monroe and live there. But that was all paid for. That was the big chunk of the Year 2 grant funds, was to pay for their lodging and meals and for their transportation so that they could get mileage reimbursement. Essentially, we wanted to make it at either no or low cost to all the attendees. In terms of the conference arrangements, like I mentioned, a lot of that was done here at the Valley Library. So I had a lot of phone conversations with Jolene O'Hearn, who is our travel coordinator for the library. She really helped us out with getting everything set up and planned here at the library. In terms of field trips, as Tiah mentioned, it was really important to us to have outside experts share their knowledge. And so we planned 2 field trips to Grand Ronde and to Siletz, and then we planned a field trip to Benton County Historical Society, which is in Willamette, which is about 10 minutes away. So those were really important. We wanted to split things up. We ended up doing a day here, and then field trip, and then a day here, another field trip, and then the last day was here at the library. We wanted to keep it as dynamic and engaged as possible so that people didn't just have to sit in a lecture hall for the entire week. And then we planned special events. On the first night, we had an opening dinner here on campus, and then on Thursday night, on the second to last day of the Institute, we had a special closing dinner at the Grand Ronde Casino. Since we were there all day anyway, we thought it would be a great ending to have a dinner there. And I'll talk a little bit more about each of these things when I talk about the Institute itself. So I have some props, actually, to show. So what we did was we gave everyone a tote bag. We made tote bags for everyone. And Laura came up with a great logo. We really wanted to have our own TAI logo, so she came up with our logo, and we put it on all of our stuff, including the PowerPoint. So when people checked in, they got their tote bag, and then the big chunk of what the planning was creating the program and the curriculum binder. So the curriculum binder was essentially all of the content that our trainers gave us. So all of their PowerPoints, all of their notes, all of their handouts, we put that all in these giant binders for people to take home with them so that they had everything, so they could follow along and take notes during the Institute, and so they could have this record when they went back to their tribes and they could share with their colleagues. And then we had our lovely programs. And with these, we had, of course, the typical programs. We had schedules, we had information about ourselves and our speakers. We had maps, of course, so people could know where to go. And then we had information at the end talking about all of the trainers that we had, all of their content. So we wanted to make it look as professional as possible, so that they could get that experience of going to a professional conference if they had never been, or that if they have been to a professional conference, we hope that this would be on the same level at least. So that's what we mostly worked on. Laura and I were working on that. This is all Laura. She did a great job with the program and the binder. And just some extra little tidbits that there are extra little things that always make a conference nice, and we, for example, gave everyone water bottles. These were a huge hit, actually, these OSU Libraries water bottles. We gave everyone water bottles. We made pins for everyone. Archives has a tradition of going crazy with making little pins for people, so we made little Tiah pins for everyone. And then, it was my prop, but now I'm actually using it. We gave everyone flash drives, and on those flash drives, we put a copy of the binder and a copy of the program. And those flash drives were actually a really huge hit. It was something that we weren't expecting, but what ended up happening was during the conference, people started sharing information with one another. They would put it on their flash drive and give it to another person, and they could take it on their computer. People wanted extra information. So, for example, Larry mentioned a disaster plan that the OSU libraries had, and we didn't have it in the binder. I think we just had a couple pages from the disaster plan. So Larry said, well, let's give it to you on a PDF. So I took people's flash drives, put it on there, and then they shared it with one another. So that was something really great that something so small could actually make a really big impact, and that was actually really good. So in terms of the Institute itself, so on the very first night, on Sunday, we had everyone come and check in, and then we had our opening dinner, and we had Jennifer O'Neill speak, and she talked about her experiences as a tribal archivist and her journey as a tribal archivist. And since she was going to be one of the lead instructors for the week, it was a really great opportunity to have people meet with her and get to know her. The opening dinner was a great way to have people get to know one another. A lot of people already knew each other, but there were some newbies in the group, so it was a nice opportunity for people to meet and greet, and sort of a nice opportunity for people to rest a little bit after their travel. Some people have to travel just an hour, and some people have to travel up to 5 or 6 hours from where they're coming from. So that was a great dinner, and Faye and Sean came, and Allison Davis-White-Eyes, the director of ISS, came. So that was a really nice, intimate dinner at the Alumni Center where we had it. In terms of the first day, so we started out on Monday. We started here at the library, and we started with grant funding session to talk about the opportunities that were available to them, because we really wanted to make sure that we assisted them in finding grant funding opportunities, so that when we talked about all these great ideas and projects, that they would be able to then go back and actually implement that. So grant funding was a really important session to start with. And then we had Jennifer talk about Archives 101, and she talked about content management systems. So that was a nice overview to the whole week. And one of the things about Institute planning, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, is I gave everyone, Tiah and Larry had their own binders. We had giant to-do lists, and we had everything worked out. We had, we had check-in, we had meals, lots of food. That's something that we tried to make sure everyone was well fed and kept happy that way. Lots of coffee and treats throughout the day, and we had everything basically timed out. I was pretty obsessive about making sure that everything was on time, but then one of the things that Laura and I talked about, and Tiah and Larry and I talked about, and we just sort of let this happen as it was we had everything perfectly timed, but then when it actually came down to the Institute, we said it's fine. If something goes over, that's no problem. And if the trainers want to change things a little bit, move to different rooms, or if they want to move their sessions around, we said that was no problem, because it actually worked out really well that we didn't have concurrent sessions. We just had everyone in the same session. We had 18 attendees, and so everyone was in the same session, and that made it really easy to be really flexible. So if the attendees were getting a little bit tired, for example, on Monday, I ran upstairs and I asked Anne and Chris if we could do an impromptu tour of special collections to break up the afternoon a little bit, and they graciously said yes. And so we were able to say, okay, let's take a break, let's go upstairs, take a tour, and then we'll come back and do more sessions. And I'll talk about a little bit on Wednesday too. That was something that worked out really well, that we just had the trainers take over, and we just said, it's your day, you can just go with the flow in terms of what the attendees want and what their interests are.
But we had talked about doing concurrent sessions.
Yes.
Because we wanted to really customize it. So records managers and archivists tend to be very different in their collections. So it's sort of like culture and records. but then we realized that that would be a logistical nightmare for flexibility, but also that it was really important for us to have them all together and learning all of the same things as part of the community building as well.
Yes, and with a group of 18 people, it worked out really nicely to have everyone all together for that exact reason, for community building and for people to get to know one another. And another thing about the conference sessions was that it was a challenge to figure out exactly who was attending. It was only until about 2 weeks before the Institute that Laura and I actually had the official list of who was coming. So we decided pretty early on that because we didn't know exactly who was coming, we wanted to just have everyone attend the same session, so that if we only had 3 records managers, we didn't want to have them all in a room for a records management session. And we talked about the need, and actually this came up, some of the attendees said it was nice to learn new things that didn't necessarily apply to their jobs. One of the things that Larry and I and Laura really learned at the site visits was that when we brought people together at the site visits, we told them that it could be archivists, records managers, anyone interested in archives. And what we found was in some cases, at some tribes, it was the very first time that all of those people had actually come together and sat down and talked about archival needs. So we thought, well, that would actually be really good to have records managers, archivists, and other members from the community all in one room talking about their needs so that they could learn from one another. So even if the culture department professionals didn't know about records retention, or it wasn't something that directly applied to them, having that knowledge and being aware of that was something that could be beneficial and then potentially foster more communication among the tribe itself. So that actually worked out really well, to not have any concurrent sessions, to just have them be all together. In terms of the next day, so on Tuesday was one of our field trips days, and we went to the Celeste Tribal Community Archives, and that was a really great day because it was a really beautiful setting, and Robert Kenta was really gracious about touring the facilities, and he talked about his projects. And on that day, we actually had a session where the tribal members themselves talked about their projects, talked about facilities planning. So it was really specific to tribal archives facilities planning, because there are some issues within working within a tribe that outsiders may not be aware of. So it was really nice to have them talk about their experiences to be able to share with others, with other attendees. And then that afternoon, so it was two field trips in one day. That afternoon, we went to Benton County. And for Benton County, that was really fun because they have a really fantastic facility, and the staff there was incredibly gracious, and they gave us tours, and then we set up tables, we set up stations. And so for those stations, what we did was we had Larry on one station talking about photo preservation. We had Elizabeth talking about audiovisual materials. We had Trevor talking about paper. And then we had Mary Gallagher, one of the staff members at BCHS, talking about textiles. And so what we did was we split up the attendees into small groups, and then we took them along to each station. Each station was about 10 or 15 minutes, and they got to have a more in-depth conversation with that station trainer, and they got a little bit more hands-on experience at those stations. So that was really fun, and the attendees really liked that. The textile station was really fun for people, even though some of them said to me, I remember one attendee said that she's in records management, but in her personal life, she absolutely loves working with clothing. So that was really fun for her. So again, even though the sessions may not have directly applied to their jobs, I think a lot of the attendees found the sessions, all of them really, really interesting, and they were able to take at least some of it and apply it to what they were doing in their jobs. So that was our field trip day. Then on Wednesday, this was our digital day that Tiah was mentioning. We had Kira Homer and Karen Estlin. They were from Google Libraries, and they talked about all things digital. That's what we call that day. And they talked about electronic record management. They talked about preservation. They had some hands-on opportunities. They brought a giant scanner, and they had attendees actually scan and and practice with that a little bit. And that was really great because they had worked with Nathan Georgiadis, who wasn't able to attend, he was on vacation, but the U of O has a history of working with the tribes as well, so it was really great to have them and have their expertise. Then on Thursday, we went to Grand Ronde, and we went there all day, and they have fantastic facilities as well. They have a great record center that they had us tour, which was really fun, and then we were able to have our closing dinner there at the casino. And that closing dinner was actually really special. We had Dr. George Wasson. He is a Quill tribal elder, and he worked on a very important project related to Oregon tribes, which was, in a nutshell, he went to the Smithsonian, he gathered a lot of the records and copied a lot of the records to bring them back to Oregon, because a lot of tribal records, of course, aren't actually in the state. They're at the National Archives or the Smithsonian. So he really worked on that project, and he talked about his personal experiences. He read poetry, and we actually stayed about an hour extra at the casino because people really just enjoyed talking to him, and it was a really great experience, I think, for the attendees, and they all really appreciated having him speak. So that was a really nice way to end on the second to last day of the Institute. So we were really excited that he was able to come and speak with all of them. So then on Friday, our last day, we purposely tried to end on Friday a little bit early because we knew that people were getting a little antsy. It had been quite a week of a lot of information. So on Friday, we basically talked about some model programs. There's a great program happening in Wisconsin called Convening Culture Keepers, where they have small, like sort of day-and-a-half workshops over a course of a few years. They have those once every 6 months or so. And so we talked about that program, and we talked about the idea of maybe that would be a good model for Oregon's tribes. And we talked about grant writing that day, and then Tiah and Jennifer talked about outreach and social media. And then we ended that day with some assessment. We called it our reflection session. So with that, I'll talk a little bit about the assessment work that we did and what we have planned to do. So it was really important for us to really get a sense of what people thought. We had them fill out session evaluations for each of the specific sessions. These were just questions like, attending this session improved my time, this session improved my skill level, I would like to learn more about this topic, and then a place for comments, and it was just strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. So we had them fill out these for each of the individual sessions, lots of sessions. And then on the reflection session on the last day, we had them fill out a short questionnaire. And this was more to get a sense of what they thought of the Institute as a whole. If you've ever been to a conference, this is typical questions that people ask about the conference, about the logistics and what they thought, just overall how it improved their needs and what they liked about it. So we did that. And then the really important part was the group discussion. And I had a list of questions for us to talk about. And in that session, we really talked about what their plans were, what they thought they would like to do, and if they want to continue gathering, if this was really beneficial to them, and if they wanted to see each other again. So that was a really great opportunity to actually get their feedback and see if they wanted to meet. And luckily, they were all very receptive and said that they would like to meet again, and it's something that they would like to do. And we brainstormed a little bit about the types of sessions that they like to learn more about, and maybe more specific workshops and things like that. So that was really good. And what we have planned in terms of a follow-up assessment is actually it's coming up soon, in just a few months, we will be doing a follow-up assessment to really see if they were able to implement all what they learned, and to see if they shared with their colleagues what they learned. Because at the time, after a conference, you might think something's really great, but then 6 months later, did you or didn't you use it? And so that's what we want to find out. So hopefully in either December or January, the grant ends in January, so we need to do it in the next few months. We'll be setting up dates for phone interviews and talking to the attendees individually and seeing what it is that they learned and what they'd like to learn more about, and then talking more about planning for the future. As of right now, we don't have plans to host another institute. I think one of the things we really gathered was that a week was maybe a little bit too long. People have small children, or they have jobs where they might be the only person in their department, and it's hard to get away. So one of the things we talked about was potentially hosting shorter gatherings, a day or day and a half or something like that. And we talked about potentially doing it around the state. So next time, maybe we could do it at actually one of the tribal archives, or we could do it at another institution. So these are all things to think about that we're hoping that during our phone interviews we'll be able to talk to them about that and what they'd like to do and how they'd like to move forward. In terms of the actual moving from institute to network part, one of the things that we talked about at that last reflection session was that people really wanted to stay in communication. And so we talked about the idea of having a Facebook page and potentially creating a listserv. And so we did both. Basically, a couple weeks ago, I created a listserv, and that's a more private method of communication because as the administrator, I have to approve messages and approve who is on the listserv. So that's a more private method of communication. But then we also talked about creating a Facebook page. After Tiah and Jennifer talked about social media, a lot of the attendees got excited and said, we'd like something like that. So we created a Facebook page as well, and that's something more public that other people could like. And then I post things about, other institute opportunities, or, recently there was an article that James Fox published about the U of O's work with their tribal archives records, and so I posted that on the Facebook page, and I also sent that out through the listserv. So it's a way to share information and to ideally have people start talking to one another or asking questions if they'd like. So that's still very much in the early stages, and we decided to call that the Oregon Tribal Archives Network because it was meant specifically for the Oregon tribes, for the attendees of the Institute, but also their colleagues, if their colleagues would like to join, and then facilitators. So that way, if they had a question that they wanted to ask, for example, Karen from the U of O, who talked about electronic records, they could potentially send that out through the listserv and she could respond. And of course, they can contact her directly, but on a listserv, as you all know, if you're on listservs, it's nice to be able to see those questions and those responses so that everyone can see what that information is. So that's what we have planned currently and for the future in terms of the Oregon Tribal Archives Network. And I think that's sort of the Institute in a nutshell, and I think we are open to questions if you have any questions at this point.
Natalia, Tiah, Larry, great job. I had a lot of fun for dinner, and heard good things about the Institute too from some of the people involved. My question is this model something that would work with other cultural groups in Oregon, or is this something that would really work best for the tribes? Or is this something you could apply to other cultural groups?
I think potentially. I think that as Larry talked about, the really important part was the site visit. So I think that if you identify another cultural group, another group, and you make sure that you take the time to actually meet with them in person and get to know them and get to know their needs, and then you're able to do that with multiple stakeholders within that community, then potentially, yes, it could be applied. I think that one of the things is, in terms of the week long, I think that depending on the community, if they want to do the week, that would be fine. But I think that definitely the model of meeting with them, doing the in-person site visits, really getting to know them, really developing the curriculum with them. One of the things that we did for the curriculum is we made sure to send all of the people we met with drafts them to get their feedback. If they had anything that they said, that doesn't interest me at all, or you left something out. So I think that process can definitely be applied to
I would agree. And in some ways, we've kind of begun that with the African American community in Portland, given that we have records of the Urban League of Portland, which has now expanded into the work that we're doing with St. Philip the Deacon Episcopal Church, traditionally African American church that has partnered with the Urban League and the activities that we're doing with them in terms of the Parish History Day, helping them to organize a lot of the historical materials of the church, and who knows what the future might bring. So it's not quite the same as the Oregon Tribal Archives network, but I think we're beginning to build communities in some of these other areas with other cultural groups.
But I just got back from my site visit to UCLA, and I talked to one of the faculty members at their library school about community archiving, and they have their graduate students go into communities and work directly with the community. So it might be 1 or 2 graduate students working on really advising and building their own personal archive, their community archive. And it's kind of a shift from the way that archivists usually do things, which is to build collections themselves. So I'm sort of intrigued by that idea of community archiving. It's almost like training the trainer. So it's allowing people to become better stewards, or I guess more, bringing a different perspective of how to archive and how to document history. So again, I think a week long, it's a long institute. This was it was to teach them, but it was also to community build for them. So giving them the opportunity to come together and stay in dorms and have that whole experience of being together as a unit was really important for us, so that they could go off in their own community and work together, that it's not about us. It was really about them. So I think modeling that kind of direct involvement in the curriculum building itself, so that we had their input in what they were taught and what we talked about to them, I think that could continue on to different culture groups, different community groups.
Yeah, I think that model overcomes some of that, what I heard from at least my visits to Warm Springs, that distrust about why are you interested in our culture?
And that was significant.
Not co-opting it. What about the opportunities for, Laura, I think, had a really good experience with the OTAN.
And now it's OTAN.
But perhaps involving some more students in that from our emerging public history program.
Well, I think that's certainly what we're trying to do. I think Hannah Mahoney, with the work that she has done with the St. Philip the Deacon Episcopal Church, is a perfect example of participating in that kind of community archives building endeavor. So that's certainly, I see that as a fundamental piece of the mission of my department of SCART. So I think identifying those opportunities for student participation is something we are always on the lookout for.
Can you give me back to like a regional institute that goes beyond the Oregon tribe? I realize it'd be hard to do site visits like the Spokane and Colorado and Idaho tribes, but they might, even if they don't have that trust level with it, they might be interested in attending the workshop because one of the other tribes had that trust built.
Actually, the state of Washington is very interested in our model. In fact, the evaluator of our year 1 grant was the travel librarian for the Lummi Nation near Bellingham, Washington. And Washington, either under the auspices of the state library or the state archives, I'm not sure which, may be looking at developing a similar kind of institute for the federally recognized tribes in Washington, which there are many more than in Oregon. And some of those communities are quite small. So they may have even more needs than some of the communities here. Next week will be Tiah, Natalia, and I will be talking to one of our colleagues, Beth Joffran, at Western Washington University, who is looking at a larger project involving Washington's tribal communities and their records and their archives. So there's definitely interest in adopting this model in other states, but personally, I mean, it could be done geographically. It could be enlarged geographically, but then I think we get into some major transportation barriers and just the distances that people would have to come, which I think can be a major barrier. I think Arizona is also.
Yeah, they've done a summit. They did a summit in Arizona. And I think one of the things that we talked about actually at the Institute, we had a discussion about Northwest Archivists, the regional organization that we have in the Pacific Northwest, and we talked about the possibility of attendees being welcome to join that organization. We had memberships that we purchased with Year 1 grant funds, and we offered them to the attendees. And essentially, the feedback that we received at the time, this could change in a few months, but the feedback that we received at the time was that the attendees were really interested in building an Oregon community. That at least our specific attendees wanted to get to know one another first, and potentially down the line we might think about something with other states or regionally, but we really wanted to address the needs of Oregon, and I think that's what the attendees at this time preferred, and so that's why we created the Oregon Tribal Archive Network. And we'll see what happens in the next 6 months, year, 2 years, but I think it just takes time, and we'll just take time to develop those relationships and see where it goes.
When are you doing your 6-month interviews?
So the grant ends in end of January, so we need to do those within the next few months.
Something popped into my head, which was, as you know, when you do your study, but when you do the interviews and you go through IRB, you could really look at this through the innovation adoption process model, because what you are showing them are innovations in their processes, and then seeing how they adopt them, and if they don't, why do they reject them. It's been useful for us as a good way to filter what people tell us and say this is how it applies to this model. You could get into the article.
Yeah, I think that we are going to start thinking about what we want to ask, and ideally we'd be able to interview all of the attendees. And we'll have to see. It was interesting when over the summer Laura and I were calling people and we're asking who could attend and who couldn't. There were some people that we actually met with during the site visits that a year ago they were thinking of attending, but then for various reasons couldn't attend. So it might also be, we'll have to think about this, but it might also be interesting to interview some of those people that could not attend and talk to them about why they couldn't attend, and if they were able to communicate with people that did attend, and if they were able to share that information. So that might be something that could be interesting as well, not only get the feedback from the attendees, but from non-attendees that we met with. So we're still in that process of figuring out what exactly we want to do in terms of the follow-up assessment. Any other questions?
All right. Well, Natalia, Tiah, and Larry, thank you so very much. So Ann and I will be sending out a feedback survey. We're going to do it digitally this time, so just look for that hopefully today. We do want to remind you we've got our next seminar presentation coming up December 14th, and Lori just brought up the e-reader project. Actually, that's our day to present. So Jane, Lori, Naviva, and myself will be presenting the session that day, so we hope to see you at that time. So again, thank you. There's plenty of refreshments still left, so help yourself. Matter if you guys want to stick around for a few minutes.
Oh, yeah.
I gotta go.
Oh, that's right.
Okay. Well, not.